He stood beneath the king's crest, silent, motionless, a guard sworn to obey nothing but protocol. And 3 steps away, Donald Trump was barking orders. "Turn it off," he said, pointing to the live feed of Zohran Mamdani's speech. The technician froze, the room held its breath, and the only man between power and silence didn't even blink. Because what Trump didn't realize was that inside Buckingham Palace, not all orders are created equal. And sometimes, not hearing is the answer. Before we show you the exact moment a royal guard held his ground in front of a world leader and protected the sound of truth without saying a single word, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, hit subscribe with the bell icon turned on, and stay right here, because what happened next didn't just silence the room. It echoed across the world. By the time the microphones hummed to life, the Grand Hall of Buckingham Palace had already surrendered to silence. Golden chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the vaulted ceiling, casting soft reflections onto the polished marble below. Along the mirrored walls, red velvet drapes framed tall windows that didn't open. Beneath them, a long table of brass nameplates and thin digital monitors stretched like a ceremonial spine, carefully arranged, carefully meaningless. No debates would take place here, only symbolism, only presence. It wasn't supposed to be political. The Democracy Summit had been pitched as a gesture of unity, a global live stream from capitals around the world, leaders speaking in sequence on transparency, accountability, and the quiet endurance of free speech. The palace had agreed to host its segment, not for content, but for location. Britain's neutrality would be visual, not vocal. But no one had told that to Donald Trump. He entered without ceremony, 15 minutes before the transmission, surrounded by his aides and 2 US press officers. He did not bow. His eyes scanned the vaulted room as if appraising a penthouse purchase, not a sovereign space. When his gaze landed on the broadcast technician at the far end of the hall, young, pale, adjusting wires behind the king's crest, he paused, then said, "That where the audio runs?" The technician nodded without words. Trump moved on, claiming the center seat with the practiced ease of someone who never waited to be seated. His aides flanked him. One leaned in with a packet of notes. He waved them away. Across the room, just beyond the final red carpet, stood Sergeant Rowan Hale, Coldstream Guard, dress uniform crisp, chin set, eyes forward. 38 years old, Afghanistan veteran, ceremonial post since the Jubilee. He did not move, he did not blink. Behind his left shoulder, the crest of the monarch gleamed from the stone wall like a silent witness. At precisely 1400 GMT, the broadcast monitors flickered to life, blue static, fading to the opening shot of the UN Hall in New York. A slow zoom framed a man stepping to the podium, Zohran Mamdani, slim, calm, no notes, just a microphone and a room full of diplomats leaning forward in expectation. Mamdani began his address with steady rhythm. Democracy isn't loud, it isn't soft, it isn't owned by those who shout, it belongs to those who listen. The echo of his words moved through gold corridors and over polished stone, and landed like a quiet match waiting to be struck. Mamdani's voice continued through the broadcast speakers, calm but unflinching. It's not noise that builds nations, it's the quiet structure of accountability, when even the powerful answer to their own laws. Donald Trump shifted in his seat. Across the long ceremonial table, most faces remained composed. Aides from the Commonwealth contingent glanced down at their notes. The French observer blinked slowly. One of the American security staff scratched the back of his neck. But Trump wasn't listening anymore. He was calculating. His eyes flicked toward the technician again, a young man in a black vest seated behind a discreet console beneath the East Gallery. A faint red LED glowed from the corner of the broadcast deck. One button push could sever the signal or redirect it to a standby loop. Trump leaned toward his press officer. "Get him to cut it." The aide hesitated. "Sir, it's mid-transmission." Trump's voice lowered. "Then cut it mid-transmission." The aide stood, walked stiffly to the technician, and bent down with a few words. The technician's hand hovered over the controls. Sergeant Rowan Hale didn't move. But he saw everything. From his station at the far end of the hall, flanked by two gilded columns, he tracked the motion without shifting his eyes. Every twitch in a palace broadcast carried weight. He'd been trained for this, long before this administration, long before Mamdani was a name on anyone's lips. The Royal Guard was taught not to react, not to interfere, but to know the difference between ceremony and breach. The technician paused, looking across the room at the royal crest and at the guard standing beneath it. Their eyes met for half a second. Hale didn't nod. He didn't blink. He simply remained. Trump noticed the pause. "What's the hold-up?" the aide whispered back, nervous. "He says it's a protected feed, under the crest." Trump scoffed. "Tell him I don't care whose crest it is. This is our segment." From the far end of the table, a quiet cough. Lord Chamberlain Alastair Hemming, seated in ceremonial black with silver trim, lifted a gloved hand in faint acknowledgement. "Mr. President, under summit protocol, transmission control lies with the host institution during live segments. The crest signifies neutrality." Trump looked at him like he was made of wax. "And if I override it?" Another silence. "No one's stopping you, sir," Hemming said evenly, "but the guard won't hear it." Trump blinked. "What?" "The guard is not trained to recognize foreign verbal orders, especially not during live ceremonial transmission. He'll hear nothing unless it comes from the crown." Hale didn't flinch. Mamdani's voice carried on in the background. "We are not afraid of disagreement. We are afraid of silence that serves power." Trump stood halfway, palm pressing to the table. "Then I'm giving the order to anyone listening. Turn it off." No one moved. The technician's hand hovered again, then slowly retreated. The red LED stayed on. The feed continued. And the guard, unmoved beneath the crest, became the stillest presence in the room. You could hear the hum of the speakers, the light buzz from the halogens, the faint squeak of a chair leg adjusting, but no one moved. Trump's voice still echoed faintly from the stone walls. "Turn it off." But it had already begun to lose weight, not because it lacked volume, but because it had gone unanswered. The technician sat back, fingers coiled together in his lap, eyes locked forward. Across the hall, Mamdani's voice continued from New York, now steadier, stronger. "And if the right to speak can be revoked by fear, then it was never a right at all, only a privilege granted by power." No one in the grand hall reached for their earpiece. No aide dared type. Even the court photographers froze in their tracks, cameras still. Except one man. Sergeant Rowan Hale hadn't twitched. Not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head. His jawline stayed sharp under the shadow of the tall black bearskin hat. White gloves steady at his sides, left boot precisely 12 degrees outward, ceremonial regulation. And yet, in the stillness, there was power. Trump turned slowly, eyes narrowing at the guard. "Hey!" Hale didn't blink. "Hey! You! Soldier!" Nothing. He stepped forward now, past the line of flags toward the far end of the room. Not charging, not shouting, but with the firm stride of a man used to being obeyed. A ripple passed through the room. Lord Hemming half rose from his chair, alarmed. Two palace aides exchanged panicked glances. The closer Trump walked, the taller Hale seemed to stand, not through motion but through inertia. The ceremonial discipline that held every inch of him still felt like defiance now, but it wasn't. It was procedure. Trump stopped 3 paces away, jaw clenched. "I gave an order." The guard said nothing. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't even flick his eyes in his direction, because in his mind nothing had changed. The speaker was still Mamdani. The moment was still sacred. The crest still hung behind him. And the summit broadcast, protected under international neutrality, was still live. But the air in the room had changed. It was now a standoff, even if one side didn't call it that. Mamdani's voice continued, soft but firm. You cannot shut the mouths of those who no longer fear the consequence of being heard. Trump shook his head in disbelief. He's ignoring me on purpose. Lord Hemming cleared his throat from across the chamber. No, sir, he's fulfilling his post. Trump turned, eyes wide. Fulfilling it? He's disobeying a command. He doesn't recognize your command, Hemming said, voice neutral. He's sworn to recognize only protocol from the Crown. Trump stepped back, bristling. This is insane. But the guard didn't move. He hadn't ignored the order. He had heard nothing, not because he couldn't, but because duty had taught him what not to hear. Trump took 2 slow steps back from the guard, jaw set tight, hands open at his sides like a man expecting applause that never came. His aides clustered near the technician, whispering with increased urgency. One of them, a thin, balding man in a navy pinstripe suit, tapped the technician's shoulder. Sir, we need you to cut the audio now, please. The technician glanced once more toward the crest. The guard stood motionless, and the technician lowered his hand again. From across the chamber, a different figure began moving, this time from the American security detail. A broad-shouldered man with a Secret Service pin adjusted the cuff of his jacket and started walking up the center aisle between the long tables, not fast, not loud, but deliberately, one hand at his earpiece, the other near his belt. He was headed straight for the broadcast console. 2 palace stewards intercepted him halfway. I'm sorry, one said calmly, stepping into his path. No access to the platform during live state transmission. I'm not here to make an announcement, the American replied. I'm here to end one. Sir, the steward said again, you are not authorized to touch Crown-linked equipment. Trump barked from behind, let him through. But the stewards didn't move. Behind them, Sergeant Hale remained still. The Secret Service agent hesitated. He'd been in conflict zones, seen standoffs and protocols get steamrolled by real-world danger. But this was different. No one here had pulled a weapon. No one was shouting. And yet the resistance felt unshakable, not because it was armed, but because it was quiet. At the side of the hall, Lord Chamberlain Hemming stood. Let me be clear, he said, voice carrying with stately ease. While the United States is an honored partner in this summit, this chamber, at this hour, is under ceremonial jurisdiction of the British Crown. He gestured toward the guard, and that gentleman, while silent, embodies that authority. Trump stepped forward again, his voice louder now. He's a soldier. He takes orders. Hemming's reply was immediate. Not from you, sir. The room went still. Mamdani's voice echoed from the speakers, words undisturbed. Power may issue commands, but dignity answers only to conscience. At that, something changed. The Secret Service man stopped walking. He didn't retreat, but he didn't press forward either. His earpiece crackled, and he stepped aside without another word. Trump's arms dropped slightly. He turned back toward the technician. But the technician was already seated again, hands folded, eyes forward, as if awaiting clearance from somewhere that outranked everyone present. Trump's aide leaned in, speaking low. Sir, if we interrupt this now, we risk the optics of censorship. The feed is global. Every summit delegate is watching. Trump didn't respond. His face stiffened, not in anger, but in calculation. He turned and looked again at the guard. The man hadn't shifted, not a breath out of place. To the cameras still rolling, it looked like a portrait. One man trying to command silence, the other defending it by doing nothing at all. A standoff, but only one side needed to win. And he was already winning, by not moving at all. Inside his chest, Sergeant Rowan Hale felt only rhythm. Not adrenaline, not fear. Just the controlled breath and internal stillness that had been drilled into him from his first day at Wellington Barracks. Feet planted, spine straight, jaw still. Every instinct pulled tight like a ceremonial bayonet strap. But inside, something had shifted. Not defiance, though that wasn't the word. This wasn't rebellion. It was something quieter and heavier. He had heard every word. He had seen the technician's hesitation, the aide's order, the walk toward the console. He had listened to the American president repeat himself not once, but twice. He had watched the room ripple around him like a pool unsettled by a stone. And yet, by the rules etched into his role, he had heard nothing. Nothing that matched the protocol registry. Nothing issued through the royal chain of authority. Nothing he was obligated to acknowledge. He thought of the phrase every guardsman learned when stationed under the royal crest. If the voice comes from outside the crown, it is to be ignored. Not out of pride, out of order. The palace taught stillness not just as posture, but as defense. And so he stood still. He did not shift weight, did not flick his eyes, did not exhale too quickly, because stillness in this moment was the only weapon that would not escalate the situation, but would also not surrender to it. Mamdani's voice carried on from thousands of miles away, but louder than the man standing 5 feet in front of him. You do not silence dissent by ordering its volume lowered. You silence it by proving it wrong. And if you cannot do that, then the silence belongs to you. The words hung in the golden chamber like incense. Not defiant, just honest. Hale's gloves remained at his sides. Trump didn't speak again. Not right away. He stared. First at the guard, then at the technician, then at the crest above. The moment held like a breath. The room saw it. The camera saw it. A moment when a soldier chose to do nothing, because nothing was the correct procedure. And for the first time in the room that day, stillness became power. At exactly 14:37 GMT, something imperceptible shifted inside the palace. The technician's console blinked once, not red, not green, but amber. A subtle shade that meant one thing to those who understood Crown systems. A passive integrity flag had been raised. Not an alarm, not a fault, just a silent record that someone, somewhere, had attempted an unauthorized override during a live diplomatic feed. The system didn't panic. It complied with legacy. On screen, Mamdani's broadcast continued uninterrupted, but now the metadata feed embedded into the transmission had silently activated continuity hold, a safeguard buried in the custodial registry's broadcasting code. That clause, written in the 1980s, granted a single power to palace infrastructure during ceremonial events. Neutrality cannot be interrupted by external actors, regardless of rank. Across the Royal Operations Room, a line of processors logged the incident. No names were listed, no accusations made. Just a precise time-stamped entry, 14:33:42. External command received, non-Crown origin. 14:33:45, technician input, declined. 14:33:50, guard post active, crest signal affirmed. 14:34, continuity, hold triggered. 14:37:12, custodial stabilization confirmed. Inside the Grand Hall, no one noticed. Not at first. But the light on the technician's console turned blue. Summit-grade quality enhancement. The audio feed sharpened, balancing its dynamic range to highlight Mamdani's voice over ambient noise. And now the words felt closer, clearer. When silence holds its ground and refuses to serve ego, it becomes a mirror. In the far corner, a palace staffer raised an eyebrow. She glanced at her tablet and saw a line of green icons light up in sequence. Crown Net was locking the feed in place. She looked toward Lord Chamberlain Hemming, who gave her the smallest nod. The system had spoken without needing to raise its voice. Trump, standing still, began to feel the shift. The room had stopped reacting to him, not in defiance, in discipline. The guard remained locked in place, eyes forward. The technician no longer wavered. The agent stood down. Even the British stewards had stepped back, not out of fear, but because the moment had settled. The king's chair at the centre of the chamber remained empty, but the silence surrounding it had chosen sides. And Trump, though he couldn't quite articulate it, sensed something institutional had decided that the conversation was no longer about him. In the pause that followed, no one interrupted. No one breathed too loud. And, on screen, Mamdani, still thousands of miles away, offered one last line before the transmission moved to the next speaker. Some halls echo with applause, others with commands, but the ones that last echo with conscience. The feed didn't fade to black. It faded to gold, just like the chamber it left behind. The feed hadn't just stabilized, it had elevated. Now, every syllable of Mamdani's voice carried as though he stood inside Buckingham itself, not on a platform in New York. The acoustic lag vanished. The clarity was so crisp, it seemed as if the microphone were built into the palace walls. And if we're honest, the world doesn't suffer from too much speech, Mamdani said, eyes steady on the UN delegates before him. It suffers when voices are rearranged by power and silenced before they can be understood. In the grand hall, no one coughed, no one checked their phone, no one whispered. Even the aides, who had previously clustered behind Trump, now remained still, unsure whether to act, speak, or breathe. The technician, still seated behind the master control unit, made no motion toward the broadcast deck. His hands rested in a neutral position. A glass of water sat untouched beside him. Trump sat down again, but slower this time, like a man deciding whether remaining seated might be interpreted as strategy rather than retreat. The optics were unmistakable. From a particular camera angle, the one facing the king's crest, you could see the guard in full posture just beneath it, unmoving. Off-center behind him, the President of the United States sat stiff, lips pressed into a line. The speaker on screen, a state legislator from across the Atlantic, was mid-sentence, the words "moral clarity" just parting his lips. And in that frame, still images were born, images that would circle the globe before the hour was out. The New York Times would describe it as a cinematic tableau of restraint. The BBC would simply caption their screenshot. He stood still while the world listened. But in this moment, no one was thinking about coverage. They were just caught in it. Mamdani continued, "The reason some voices shake the ground isn't because they're loud. It's because they carry silence that has been earned. The silence of ancestors, of prisons, of quiet halls like this one, waiting for a moment when someone would simply refuse to look away." A wave moved through the room, invisible but felt. Not an emotional swell, but an alignment. Trump didn't speak again. He didn't have to. He knew the moment had passed him. And it hadn't been taken by force. It had simply moved, shifted across the hall like light through stained glass, landing not on him, but on the guard who never moved, the technician who never folded, and the voice that never broke. The last words of Mamdani's address arrived without drumroll or applause. "Let your silence be earned, and let it speak when nothing else can." The chamber didn't erupt, it just held still. For once, the silence wasn't awkward, it was earned. The summit feed ended, not with a bang, but a single muted click. The monitors blinked once, then returned to the royal seal, gold on blue, flickering softly like a ceremonial breath held and released. Inside the grand hall, the silence remained. No applause, no outro music, just the gentle sound of chairs adjusting as people remembered they could move again. Trump rose first, not abruptly, not with anger, just upright. His face unreadable, as if already preparing for the version of this story he'd tell later. His aides gathered behind him with quiet, studied efficiency, eyes darting, not speaking. At the technician's station, nothing had changed. The young man still sat at attention, expression composed. His console remained untouched since the feed had begun. Then came the voice, not from the floor, but from behind the scenes. "Sir," a low voice said. It was one of the president's own protocol officers, holding a tablet with a real-time broadcast tracker. "It's already online. Clips are circulating." Trump said nothing. He looked once more at the guard, at Sergeant Hale, who had not moved since 14 The man's silhouette remained framed against the gold-leafed wall, the red of his Coldstream tunic brilliant under the chandeliers. Even now, he didn't glance toward the delegation. He didn't acknowledge that anyone had spoken. Trump turned away. As he passed Lord Hemming's chair, he muttered something inaudible, not confrontational, but hollow. And then he was gone. Outside, the motorcade engines stirred. Inside, the palace resumed its rhythm. Palace aides retrieved notes. The floor was swept. Footsteps returned. But something about the room had changed. Even those loyal to protocol knew it. Something sacred had unfolded. And it hadn't come from a throne, a king, or a podium. It had come from the decision not to act. Sergeant Hale was quietly dismissed from post-rotation 15 minutes later. He didn't salute. He turned, pivoted, and walked the marble corridor with deliberate calm. As he passed the corridor leading to the operations room, a small monitor looped the summit feed. It was replaying Mamdani's final lines, "Let your silence be earned." He didn't stop walking, didn't linger. He just adjusted his gloves and disappeared down the eastern corridor, one step at a time. By the time the technician powered down his console, he looked up for the first time in 45 minutes. He glanced toward the empty guard station, then toward the crown, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he smiled. Not because they had won anything, but because nothing had been taken. The still frame emerged barely 20 minutes after the summit feed ended. It wasn't planned, it wasn't polished, but it was perfect. A wide shot from the palace's media rail, Sergeant Rowan Hale, unmoving beneath the king's crest, white gloves by his sides, eyes straight ahead. Donald Trump, off-centre, mid-stride, palm open in half-command, frozen in the act of trying to regain control of something already lost. And over their heads, a monitor still aglow, showing Mamdani at his podium with the word "truth" in glowing caption beneath him. Within the hour, the image had circled the globe. No quote was needed, no chyron, just a silent contrast that spoke volumes. Silence, power, defiance without disobedience. The BBC ran the frame under a two-word headline, "Stood Still." The Guardian published an editorial within 4 hours. In an age where outrage is constant and reaction is currency, one guard did neither. And in doing so, reminded us that real dignity doesn't shout, it holds. American news channels took sides. Some commentators accused the palace of passive resistance. Others hailed the guard as a symbol of institutional discipline in the face of coercive spectacle. Palace officials declined comment. The press office issued a single-line response. The guard followed protocol under crest-bound procedure. No deviation occurred. There was no name given, no interviews granted. Sergeant Hale's face, partially shadowed beneath his bearskin hat, remained unknown to most of the world, but the silhouette was enough. That single frame, one man standing still while power tried to command silence, became a symbol. Artists recreated it. Protesters printed it on banners. One university in Canada projected it on the side of its law faculty building with a caption, "The Constitution lives in moments like this." But inside Buckingham Palace, the photo wasn't hung. It wasn't discussed. It wasn't needed. Because those who understood the crest understood what had happened. No rebellion, no disrespect, just the quietest possible correction, carried out by the only person in the room who hadn't said a word. Should a soldier obey every command, even when that command isn't his to follow? And can silence, real, principled silence, ever speak louder than the leader giving the order? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this moment made you feel something, tap the like button to support the guards who still hold the line. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on, so you never miss what really happens behind the crown's closed doors. And share this video with someone who still thinks silence is the same as weakness. More Royal Guard stories are already on your screen, so watch the next one now. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.